Of course, we know that there are a lot of vested interests, and I've in the past some time, and allow me 30 seconds. In the past sometimes
Yeah.
I've been able to distinguish these vested interests, which lay, of course, in the United States. There are two particular areas where the India interaction is the most. One, of course, is the State Department, and the second is the Defense Department. When we look at the Defense Department, it is India, 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 national security strategy, it's India, this, that, and the other. The detractors from this particular policy is obviously the State Department, where we know the neoconservatives, we know the vested interests of various different George Soros and so on and so forth. Uh, in this internal battle between the two departments within the US, this is not something new. I mean, I probably have stumped over it and I've probably been able to confirm it in my own mind recently. How do you see the vested interests within them fighting for and against India? And what kind of an impact do you see on India considering the narrative attacks that have already come in, sir?
Look, I don't think that the narrative, the difference between the State Department and the Defense Department is as stark as it is being made out to be. I won't say that there is a deep state in the United States orchestrating like this, but let us face it, for a long period of time, the natural allies of the United States was Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And significant elements of the United States establishment were comfortable with that. Now, that dynamic started to get over with the closure of the Cold War, and it got a further beating with what happened, 9/11 and so on and so forth. However, those twin departments were still very close to, far more comfortable with China than they were with India. So let's
Again.
not talk about Pakistan and India. Let's talk about our position vis-a-vis China and India. Now, what has happened? Somewhere down the line, the Americans have said, that the gambit we played with China, hoping that it would become a democratic state, we gave them so many concessions, allowed them into WTO, opened our markets for them. And here are the Chinese who, in a sense, basically are making life, in a sense, growing too big for their boots. So that's there. Yet within the United States itself, you have news agencies like Bloomberg, which basically keep on pushing the China story all the time and keep on running down India. Look, the fact remains that there are vast sections of the United States that are economically beholden to China, because they have a presence in the Chinese market. The strategic game that China plays, allow one or two players to have a presence in your market. It could be the media market, whatever, the financial market, so to speak. They will basically do their bidding for you. And these agencies, Bloomberg, they do follow a particular principle. When you are bought, stay bought. So the Bloomberg faithfully and very strategically plays down India vis-a-vis the Chinese. So far, India did not have a coherent line, with respect to economics, with respect to a lot of things, and as a result of which the United States kept on looking at India as a strange kind of a fish. We don't know what it is. India will still not allow the United States to use it as a gambit against China. Look, we have problems vis-a-vis China. How we solve them, ultimately we have to solve it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to ensure is China does not receive support when we have a friction with China. It is not in China's interest, given its economic engagements, to have a war with India. Because let us face it, in a war with India or a conflict with India, India can inconvenience China tremendously. And the Chinese growth model, which is based on exports, needs a peaceful world. It cannot function in a world where sea routes are disturbed or come under threat. Need I say more? So there is a limit to what China can do vis-a-vis India as of now. Later on, they will try newer things, they will try different things. But as of now, you can have a Galwan from time to time. You can have these these inconvenient UN sessions, emergency sessions called by the Chinese from time to time, where the status of Kashmir Jammu Kashmir is discussed. And where to their shock they find even the Russians, in a sense, are not stepping up, because the Russians also know how far to go with China. The
Yeah,
Russians are mature enough to ensure that their friends won't decide who their enemies are. You see, that kind of maturity the Russians have. It seems that at times the Americans don't have this kind of maturity.
I agree with you absolutely. I don't think I have anything to add to that. That's a fantastic this thing. So my last
That is
two
the
questions.
problem.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think what you've said is very, very interesting, because the China challenge is, of course, a big challenge, and what we see coming out of America is the quest, and if I may use that word very carefully, the quest to get India into an alliance so that something could be done, or India could counter China in the region,
Very
and that's something
simple.
that we see.
They should have a trade policy where they should start sourcing stuff from India.
My question is, will there be a cost when we open out our markets and we say, okay, let's do this? What will be the cost that we will have to pay to the West apart from
See,
trade?
see, I don't see it as a cost. The fact is, if they shift some of their supply chains to India, then of course we start depending on Western markets. But they also start depending on the Indian market. No, nobody wants to disturb a set up supply chain.
Yeah,
So see, we have no problems with global integration. Okay, but the West is finding out that they are now beginning to have a problem with economic integration vis-a-vis the Chinese. They're beginning to find out, because the Chinese are beginning to flex muscles from time to time, send out very inconvenient reminders about what they can do. Okay? The Australians know about it. Slowly but surely, other countries who look at Australia are also starting to have second doubts. But even then, I do not see a concerted strategy by the West to ensure that they have an alternative supply chain in a country like India. And,
absolutely.
and I have to ask myself, why is that? Do they think that their problems with the Chinese are short-term problems that are going to go away? If so, we are all entitled to live, all entitled to our illusions. What can I say?
I mean, yeah, of course. It's also vested interest that you mentioned before. There's just so much of
Always,
integration which is
always,
there.
always, always.
There's just so much of it. So, my last question to you: for India to achieve what it wants to achieve, and the Prime Minister's laid it out very, very carefully. He said 2047, 25 years from now, we would like to call ourselves a developed nation. Now, there is a symbolic aspect to it, because the Chinese say rejuvenation of China at 2049. That's 2 years after us. We say 2 years before them. What is the symbolism of something like that? And of course, on a more serious note, what are the biggest priorities that India needs to work on to achieve something like that? And I'd like to keep it economically, which will, of course, impact our geopolitical position.
Look, there's no symbolism. 2047 is 100 years after Indian independence. 2049 is 100 years of the takeover of the Chinese Communist Party. That's all. So that's the symbolism.
Yeah,
Look, to become a developed economy, what do you require? What is the sign of the developed economy? Is that everybody is educated, everybody is well fed, everybody has opportunities. And in today's environment, this has to be environmentally sustainable growth. Your model has to be one where there has to be sustainability all around, social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and financial sustainability.
true.
And I would argue that we are on our way to do that. The Chinese probably are not. Look, I mean, why India, why China? Look, the Chinese started with a one child policy. Okay, ruthlessly implemented it from 1949 onwards. Now, what do you have? The inversion
Yeah,
of the pyramid. Inversion of the pyramid. Two people retiring, one person basically taking up. So,
yeah.
the pension burden on the working Chinese population, in a sense, is going to increase. The labor costs are going to increase. That will basically bring in some changes in the Chinese economy. I think some for the better, some will be painful. But when it comes to environmental sustainability, look, If you look at it, they are still depending on these mega projects, diversion of rivers, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
If you look at us, what we are looking at is not so much water linking. We talked about that some years ago. We are talking about rainwater harvesting. We are talking about, watershed management
Sustainability.
and so on and so forth. And that
Mm.
makes sense for us. Okay. We are talking about deforestation. We are talking about clean energy. Although we've told the rest of the world, we are not going to go along the timelines that you set. Already you see the elements of a social security net being put in. When it comes to health, we have a health insurance policy which receives far less praise than it actually should. We've already put up a digital infrastructure, and I'm talking about the JAM treaty, which will allow government to transfer incomes over a period of time. You will be able to implement a unique UBI, a unique basic income. The West will not be able to do because they don't have that digital infrastructure any longer. So
Connect.
I would argue with our policies, with our decentralized government, which has to have given, you have to give finances at appropriate levels, we will be able to do what we want to do in a manner that is politically sustainable, socially sustainable, environmentally sustainable. I doubt whether China has yet put in the kind of institutional bricks that are required to make this happen. I would argue we are putting in these particular bricks. And this is not just one government alone. Several governments, in a sense, have come together to make this happen. It's an India story. The
Yeah.
tragedy is the following: the UPA government starts the UIDAI, and then certain jholawalas in that particular government says, "Oh, yeah, ye hona nahi chahiye." It is Prime Minister Modi who basically, invests a lot of capital and administrative power in ensuring that it is made complete. He invests political capital in ensuring that GST basically comes to fruition. Otherwise, before that, we were always dancing but never advancing. The set of the Congress of Vienna, always danced but never advanced. He came in and within 2 years it was implemented.
Yeah.
There have been flaws, but nonetheless it's implemented. So the building blocks, in a sense, that were there all along, is being brought to position by investment of a lot of capital, a lot of effort by the present government. And that makes me optimistic that we are on the right path. Macroeconomically policy, we have been following sound policies. Our banks have been cleaning up their acts. And if you look at the Chinese banks, that's another story out there. So if you look at Chinese finances, the manner in which so many things are hidden, we don't know what's going on out there. Although I believe the extent of which they're hiding things is possibly overstated. But when it comes to India, it's all easily available. You can see what's going on and you know what has to be done to put things right. And that is why I would argue we will become a developed country by 2047. Now, don't measure the development by how many things will be earned per dollars, and compare us with the United States. The
Mm.
United States and the Western European countries are for the first time seeing their middle classes falling into poverty.
Correct.
They have to go to food kitchens, charity to eat food. We did a lockdown. We were able to stave off starvation given our digital infrastructure, Food Corporation of India, and transfer of food gain and cash. The United States is still writing checks.
Yep.
The capacity in India now exists to do wonderful things. That capacity is something that the West never had, and the Chinese don't have either.
And they're not even talking about building it. If I
They're
may
not
just
talking
go
about
out.
it. Not.
This was eye-opening, sir. Let me just say that. And as one thing just pops into the head when you describe things like that, it's called a basic backbone infrastructure, and that's not physical infrastructure. That is basically a developmental infrastructure which is coming up to support your people to do stuff
Yes,
on their own. And
on
that
their
to
own.
me was the difference between the package that was given in India during COVID and the package that was given in the US. They treated them is like children. Okay, here's your $10 pocket money. Go do what you want to.
And that is
We
why
said
they're in a
no.
massive mess today. You see,
Yes.
this splurging of money is one reason why they're in such a mess today. You see, If you look at our assumption of the G20 presidency, we've handled our COVID well.
Yep.
We've done it in a manner so that our macroeconomic factors are strong, inflation relatively low compared to the rest of the world, growth rates relatively high with respect to the rest of the world. These were the people who were telling us, keep on spending, etc. When we were in a lockdown where spending wouldn't have done such a good. So today they are in a mess. And yet India does not get the kind of credit it should give, given the fact how well it's managed itself during COVID. So that shows what are the things that are going on in the rest of the world.
That's the ecosystem. So at the end of it,
That's it.
that's something that we know. Professor, this was an eye opener. Let me assure you this. It's a first interaction between you and me, and I look forward for many more, especially the one on China. I'm looking forward to that
For
because it's
sure.
going to be an eye opener for me personally because I am a China guy and I want to learn about the economics and how the economy of China is going to open out in some time. Coming back to this one, sir, I think you've brought about certain very interesting points with regards to India's growth that needs to be monitored by citizens. The reason I wanted to have this conversation is a lot of times people don't equate economics with geopolitics. And I'm a pure geopolitics channel. I thought there is a need for people to understand the economic standing of India, which is what is giving the heft to our leaders to do what they need to do in the world today. If Minister Jaishankar can speak the way he spoke in Europe and put them off, it is because of our economic standing, not just the chest beating thing that anybody would want to do. So thank you so much for bringing that out, sir. Please.
See, Jaishankar could say what he said because even in Europe there's divisions. I would imagine Prime Minister Meloni of Italy and possibly the Hungarians, okay, would not take offense to what he said. So
Nope.
it's not a united Europe, actually. It's a quite a divided Europe, and those divisions we've played them pretty well. So he chose his audience well.
Absolutely. And Olaf Scholz also came out and said that, Europe's problems are not the world's problems. I mean, that was a shocker. The German chancellor. That's the big thing.
Germany hurts when you start freezing off Russia, cutting off Russia. Germans get hurt because they were the principal buyers of Russian gas and oil.